Very much, Stefano. Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Carre. What I'm taking from this session, it is that we have more than growing synergies between fusion and fission. I'm taking the need of increased collaboration and exchanges and sharing experiences, and probably not the international organizations shall really look more into this type of topics and come with more support in order to facilitate that. The second speaker of this morning, it is Professor Ambrosini. Mr. Ambrosini has been associate professor at the University of Pisa since 2001 and the full professor since 2016. He began working at the Pisa University in 1992 as an assistant professor. He holds a degree in nuclear engineering from the University of Pisa and the research doctorate in nuclear engineering. He held the following professional charges or memberships: President of the European Nuclear Education Network Association from 2013 to 2016, President of the Research Doctorate Course in Nuclear and Industrial Safety of the University of Pisa, 2008-2016, President of the Master Course in Nuclear Engineering, and as of March 2016, he has been the Associate Editor of the ASME Journal in Nuclear Engineering and Radiation Science. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Too many things you said about me, but thank you. This is a, let me say, cooperative effort. This paper is on education and training and mobility, and I will make, on the basis of the contribution I received from colleagues from University of Pisa, from ENEN, Professor Sisel and Pedro Diegues, from the Lithuanian Energy Institute, Egidius Urbonavicius, Iskrent Svetvok, from Kozlodui Nuclear Power Plant, Daniela Diaconu from Reten, Jan Link Krosterman from TU Delft, and Rudi Koenigs from the Joint Research Center. So it will be about education and the different projects. I will summarize very sketchy, let me say, which has been some project which add at least some aspects related to education. I grouped the different projects upon, let's say, request from the referees of this paper in different slots, needs of new member states and specific regional initiatives, exchanges with educational systems beyond Europe, continuing education efforts for nuclear technologies, and project, let me say recent project, I should say, by ENEN, with some conclusion that I will try to draw. About, let's say, education, you know that the usual complaint when we meet each other in the nuclear field is that our technology is raising enthusiasm and aversion in many circumstances, and this of course is bad for the technology. Sometimes I believe that we don't know what could be nuclear technology if we had not this stop and go, stop and go, stop and go because of the accidents and so on. But certainly, let's say some reasons because of that are the mass intensive characteristics of nuclear, which are perceived sometimes as an opportunity or a deterrent. The bias of feelings, which are cyclically weakening all the efforts that we do in order to keep a nuclear workforce. And this occurs after accidents without any real rationale, if we must be honest about that. The effect of this phenomenon on education and training and on the workforce, of course, is the presence of fluctuations in the workforce. Some reports, national reports about the workforce in the different countries are reporting some sort of two-bumped camel, let me say, shapes in the curves that depict, for instance, the experience of the people or the number of people which are working in the field. Of course, we need in the workforce nuclear experts, which are very important because they know better the knowledge and skills related to nuclear, but also non-nuclear experts, which are sometimes depicted in some reports as a sort of bottleneck, especially if you have a consistent build, new builds, because they must be litigated maybe with other sectors. I'm speaking about civil engineers or electrical engineers or mechanical engineers who have to work in the construction, the future construction of nuclear power plants. This is an optimistic view, of course, to have this kind of litigation in some sense, because this means a lot of new builds, but let me say, never say never. Nuclear and nuclearized experts are both relevant. I believe that many of you know this kind of representations of the subdivision of the nuclear workforce in two different categories from the experts. Here, for instance, from a famous Iran report, the Human Resources Observatory in Europe of Nuclear, in which 16% of the experts are pretty nuclear. Then you need 74% of nuclearized people and 10% of nuclear aware. And this, which was drawn from a UK national report on the workforce, is actually giving the same message, which means, let's say, a first tier with the subject matter experts, and then nuclearized people at, let's say, the different levels. So the problem of workforce must be looked at all the particular levels. A common feature of the personnel working in the nuclear field, and we heard also, let's say, about this interaction with the fusion, is to be trained in nuclear safety culture. This is, let's say, an important must at any level, because even, let's say, the last subcontractors must be aware that he works in the field of something that may have safety consequences. This is let's say the overriding priority, just to use some words that describe nuclear safety culture in some IAEA or INPO document. In the current description of the nuclear workforce, do we see that the experts are just a little tip in the pyramid? Actually, we have to take into account that in order to produce them, you need a lot of education, but also research for decades in order to, let's say, have these people there. And another point is that they are knowledge and skill multipliers, in the sense that they will teach to the others, to the nuclearized people, let me say, the different matters. So let me say the objectives of the project I will summarize are aimed, let me say, mainly to contribute to dampen these oscillations and so on. This project have the common intent to contribute at different extents to nuclear education and training. And here I mention, of course, the existence of the European Nuclear Education Network. We have here the Vice President, Jörg Stafflinger, which is now, let's say, based in Belgium, which started with only 22 members in 2003 and celebrated to date up to the 15th anniversary. This association tried to stimulate, let's say, the different actors that were already in the field, and try to group it. Okay, let's now list the addressed project and summarize their main outcomes. Needs of new member states and specific regional initiatives is a first category of project. In recent years, let me say, when new member states joined the European Union, there was the need to, at least it was raised the concern about their effective inclusion into the process of networking, of education, research, and so on. A good level of participation of new member states in Euratom project was identified as an important target to be achieved. Then in addition, the specific situation and key initiatives going on in specific area stimulated to have a specific action devoted to them. This was the case, for instance, of the lead-cooled fast reactor demonstrator, Alfred, let's say, that we heard a lot speaking about in these days, to be built in Romania, which triggered one of these projects in order to assess which were the capacity, let me say, of the whole system to address this endeavor. Likewise, the Baltic region, which hosts a number of research centers and institutions with considerable potential in nuclear science and technology, was also addressed because in order to improve the cooperation and, let's say, in order to fully develop the potential of these research centers. Projects addressing these issues were conceived and run. So I start with the first one in the list, which is the FP7 New Lancer project, which ran from 2011 to 2013, which paved the way for a sustainable participation of the new member states in European nuclear energy research. There was the need to welcome, let me say, these new member states with the, let's say, in the frame of the old member states. So in the consortium, there were 6 new member states: Bulgaria, Hungary, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovenia. And one of the actions which was made, here you can see the structure of the different work packages and the different analysis, the different actions, like the analysis of skills and current participation of new member states in Euratom projects, the networking activities in order to improve them, the good practices and recommendations that could, let's say, be obtained by this analysis, and the dissemination. Action in order to link regional experts with the old member state research centers and platforms like SNETP, AGDTP, and Melody were made, and let's say 5 regional expert groups in 9 nations grouped a number of specialists in order to have this kind of participation, let me say. For education and training, actually, it was found a good international participation from these states, which was already there, but the common issue, of course, was the usual complaint for the declining interest for nuclear careers, which is there, and it is one of the points with which we have to cope mainly. That the need to improve several things was also pointed out by the project. I am a little bit more longer on that, thanks to the contribution received by the colleague. On strategic planning, for instance, cooperation between activity holders and universities, which is always a problem sometimes. Info on Euratom actions that should be included into study programs in order to give the fresh, let me say, the fresh information from research projects to let me say, the methods which are taught, ensuring new member state visibility in European nuclear initiatives. We must say that this New Lancer project actually was very productive, because some 4 projects later on were, let's say, were actually promoted by this first action that I have just finished mentioning. The Arcadia project is assessment of regional capabilities for new reactors development through an integrated approach, is actually related to the Alfred as a demonstrator of LFR in Romania. The project mainly, as a first objective, assessed its feasibility, and in particular the work package 1 coped specifically with education and training needs. You can hardly read, I believe, but here there is work package 1 with skills and infrastructures. Then there are other items like licensing framework, national and regional support, structures, feasibility, and kind of the roadmap, and so on. What were the outcomes of this project? Of course, there were found good perspective for Alfred construction, so it was a positive outcome, let me say, in relation to the construction of this demonstration reactor that was also presented several times in this occasion, and in particular in a workshop which was held yesterday. Good competencies at regional level and at EU levels were found, but anyway, new competences were needed, in particular for nuclear data, and we had presentation about that. This is a common issue for fast reactors in general. then lead thermal hydraulics, thermomechanics, and lead chemistry, instrumentation and control, management of an international project to be, let's say, coordinated by different countries. Then, based on the ECVET principle, and ECVET stands for European Credit for System for Vocational Education and Training, which is, let's say, a frame in which training is being developed in Europe. Education and training was proposed with a specific approach, which was called the Conceive, Design, Implement, Operate approach, which was proposed in the frame of the project. Application of specific courses at excellent centers, and a new program in energetic and nuclear at University of Utrecht. So actually these were, let's say, the outcomes of the project. Academic knowledge was found among the critical prerequisites, and the need to timely fill the gap, as for instance by this action, was considered. Then we come to the brilliant project, which is a Baltic region initiative for long-lasting and innovative nuclear technologies. The objective was to establish and promote cooperation in Baltic region, increase cooperation for better nuclear energy development, and establish a roadmap to Euro-Baltic Center of Nuclear Research and Technology. The point is that, as I can show here, there are many research centers in the Baltic region that should cooperate better. At the time, this was the issue, to cooperate better among each other in order to exploit much better their capabilities. The outcome is that the involved countries organized, for instance, meetings on nuclear with student, industry, politicians, and stakeholders in order to raise concern, let's say, about the new development. Sweden offered access to different laboratories like the HASPO Hard Rock Laboratory, the Bentonite Laboratory, the Canister Laboratory, and the site investigation at Oskarshamn. Then there were development in the energy sectors, which were modeled by some specific tools, and these come the educational part, let me say, that was included in the project, and also energy security simulation, which were assessed by some instrument which were set up, some tool which were set up at the time. Let's say as an outcome also some proposal like the Tubetina project for Baltic education and training infrastructure in nuclear application was proposed later on. Exchanges with education system beyond Europe. As soon as the European Nuclear Education Network was set up, downstream, let me say, the Bologna Convention, which facilitated the exchanges within Europe by harmonization by by mutual recognition, the need was felt to go a little bit abroad, especially towards countries like China and Russia, which are very much involved in nuclear technology, and so there was this incentive, in some sense, to address them. Is there any problem? Okay, oh, I'm too loud. Okay. Okay. So some Larsen effect. Okay. On the other side, but I will jam everything in the video. Okay. Anyway, I'm not that great in the video. Okay. I'm stay here. Okay. Okay, that's fine. I see less, but anyway, it's okay. Okay. So the point is, let me say, after the introduction of the ECTS, the idea was to just look if it was possible to extend the same experience and the same tools also to China and Russia. We can say that the experience with China was less successful than the one with Russia. There was this first project, which was FP7 ANNETTE, exchanges with China, namely, the laser is working, yes. The objectives were cooperation in the nuclear fields, promoting mutual recognition, expanded exchanges of students and lecturers, and secure knowledge management. Actually, let's say the idea was to have two mirror projects and consortia on both sides, which were speaking to each other with almost homogeneous, let me say, constitution. And then Language difficulties were found at the time, you can understand. Speaking to Chinese would need to learn Chinese, which is not, it's very interesting, let me say, but not so frequent. Insufficient exchange of information also on education and training system turned out. So the project was not very much successful in that sense. But anyway, there were some useful links which were established, let's say, for instance, between the Polytechnical School in Torino and the Shanghai Jiao Tong University. Anyway, there is still great interest in reproposing a cooperation with possibly less difficulties nowadays. Yeah, I will go fast. Then ENEN-RU II, it was a similar project. Actually, it was much more successful. One of the objectives was to define a common basis for cooperation between Russia and Europe. The structure was more or less the same, and it was possible to have a comparison of curricula in nuclear engineering and find, let's say, good comparisons, to set up bilateral agreements, participation in joint courses and for both education and training, and a web database for education and training facilities was set up, and participation in key events on either side, for instance, Atom Expo and so on. This was a successful project which is still lasting. I have seen in a workshop on education that we had here in FISA that the forum, the ENEN-RU forum, is still going on after the project, which means that there is still cooperation. Continuing education efforts for nuclear technology. Here I go very quick because I'm old. I need to. Let me say, actually I'm referring to, let's say, Western technology, but also to VVR technology, for which initiatives have been set up. First of all, the GENTLE project, whose objectives, very much in a nutshell, were offering training to students via student research experiences, offering inter-semester courses for bachelor and Master of Science students, setting up a MOOC for nuclear energy. Actually, all these actions were very successful. A good number of students participated. And I want to mention that the MOOC had a large success in 3 editions. The last number is a little bit underestimated because it was taken at the time of writing of the paper, but you see that we are in the range of 5,000 attendees for each shot of this, let's say, this massive open online course. In the words of those who participated, the MOOC was a very inspiring and rewarding action which was set up. Corona II. Corona II is actually a product which is devoted to education and training, but in the VVR area, since VVR reactors are, let's say, proposed also in Europe. It is important to continue the action, which was, by the way, started in the previous project, which was the Corona project, in order to set up, let's say, training schemes and give them a better sustainability. The outcomes were pilot training for different groups, like nuclear professionals and researchers, non-nuclear professionals, students, professional and personal contractors. Distant training and e-learning was used, also making use of the IAEA CLP for NET. And the establishment of the Corona Academy, which is an academy to give sustainability to all these courses, was one of the outcomes. And this actually happened in the frame of the European Nuclear Education Network Association, which was found to be instrumental to provide this kind of sustainability. Pilot training courses and so on. ENEN project, I go very quick, I'm almost at the end, just to reassure everybody. Let's say they represent, I will mention 3 of them, which have been run recently, which are the NUSHARE project, the ANNETTE project, and ENEN-PLUS. I go directly to the description. NUSHARE was a project implementing European education, training, and information. So not only E and T, but E and T and I. initiative, which was proposed directly by the cabinets of the commissioners at the European Commission after the East Japan earthquake and tsunami in March 2011. You know about the stress test and whatever. There was also this action which was aimed to revive the knowledge and interest about nuclear safety culture. And the challenging part of the project was that there were three target groups. The first one was represented by journalists and civil society, society representative like decision makers, which was not at all so easy to address. Then the target group 2 represented staff members of nuclear regulatory authorities and technical safety organization, and TG3 represented electric utilities at managerial level. The outcomes I sketch very briefly. For instance, in the case of journalists, I invite you to look on the website of the World Federation of Science Journalists, because there is an educational media written by journalists for journalists under the, let's say, the project, and with the help of people from IRSN and other organizations who were involved, that is just made in order to make journalists be able to reasonably cover stories about nuclear energy, as they do, for instance, for Ebola and other, let's say, scientific issues. This is a very nice, let me say, outcome, because there is, let's say, all the material that the journalists should know in order to go on and cover the story. Then there were several training schemes for NRAs and TSO by ANSTI and INBEX, and several sessions by Technatom for TG3. ANNETTE is still ongoing, and we hope to finish by December 2019. The objectives were many, I must say: coordinating networking in the nuclear fields, to set up a master, which must be intended as a sort of master after master, so second level master, and summer school for continuous professional development. This is the challenging part, because addressing people, professionals, is not that easy, and we are now summing up the experience that we got. Reviving the production of educational material in the frame of ENEN, because there were some prior realization in that sense, but let's say we wanted something more. Implementing a cross-border personnel exchange in industry. You know, we are always speaking about cross-border mobility, cross-company mobility. In this case, it was really done between Framatome and Technatom. Reinforcing action for promoting nuclear safety culture, supporting the process of nuclearization of fusion. And here I come to the subject that was previously touched, because FuseNet knocked actually at the door when we were preparing the project, trying to join, because they, of course, need some courses in order to nuclearize, as they say, fusion, which means to have the same awareness about safety issues, to have the same, let's say, input for engineering problems as they need now. I must say that we are more or less on track with the lights and shades on the project, and we hope to finish very soon. Then the last but not least project is ENEN-PLUS, which is attract, retain, and develop new nuclear talents beyond academic curricula. Actually, it is addressing different groups, like high school, secondary school pupils, Bachelor of Science and Master of Science, nuclearization people, which means professional wanting to address nuclear, PhD, postdoc, and lifelong learning in general. Then another action is explore the voluntary accreditation functionality within ENEN, also, let's say, taking some of the actions which have been made in the past. Let's say the actions have been developed according to the objectives. I must mention something that is very much important. The project has nearly €1 million to be distributed as grants for mobility of students within Europe, from Europe to other countries, and from other countries to Europe. And so I invite everybody who wants to let me say, have some finances to go there and read accurately the 8 pages, if I'm not wrong, of the instruction to apply. My voice is fading. Anyway, I'm at the end. Conclusions. The project which have been described addressed relevant aspects of education and training in the nuclear field. There was a deep worry for the preservation and further development of competencies in relation to nuclear reactors. It is clear that in different European member states, the acquisition of nuclear competencies is not favored. My country is one of them, for instance. A problem to be tackled in this context is the one of the sustainability of the above described efforts as it was tried by ENEN in the latest project. It is important that all stakeholders be aware and agree on the need to provide sustainable resources. Here I put something that at the time I was writing the paper was a sort of novelty, because I was writing this paper back, let's say, before the end of the year. Now everybody is mentioning this sentence, which is from the Clean Planet for All, and actually let me say that it is an important statement which tends to confirm that all the efforts which have been made in the field of education and training may become useful in the future, because if we really have to preserve 15% of nuclear energy by 2050, there will be a lot to dismantle and a lot to rebuild of our nuclear power plants in Europe. Finally, I just mentioned that, let's say, in the Euratom work program, which is the current one, there is a description of what should be done, and it seems to base actually very much on what has been done. So rather than developing new programs, try to make good use of existing ones to be adapted, and I believe that this suggestion will be followed. So the interest for preserving and enhancing education and training is still high, and it's, in my opinion, an attention that must not be disregarded too much, because otherwise we will have problems as soon as nuclear will again become very much important for our European Union. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions, comments? Yes, please.
One question. In several projects, you mentioned MOOC. I am convinced that MOOC is a good way to promote nuclear culture among some part of the population, journalists in particular, civil society, even decision makers. But do you think it's a good way to train engineers, nuclear engineers?
Let me say, I'm a university teacher, so I'm in favor of a very, let me say, progressive teaching in nuclear, starting from university. So I cannot but agree with you with the fact that the traditional teaching, with, let's say, using also e-learning as far as possible, it is something we are doing in our projects, let me say, is very much important. MOOCs may be very intriguing, and in some sense they can trigger a lot of interest for the matter, and maybe defeat that kind of how to say skepticism that people have in relation to nuclear. I believe that the experience of Gentle Concetta has been involved in that is a very positive one, because they have a huge number of attendees. I agree with you that maybe there is some people which in the end will not complete the course or will not make the examination. I don't know which are the numbers in that sense. I've seen with my course that I put in e-learning, I put in e-learning a course on thermal hydraulics, which is 60 hours of teaching, and 13 persons were considering it, but in the end having the examination was something that was not so much liked. So the idea is that, yes, sometimes these kind of tools may lighten a little bit the preparation, give more information than education, but in the future I believe that it will be possible also to improve the effectiveness of these tools.
Thank you. On the same line, do you consider an alternative to increase this level of information, not necessarily education, to a larger public?
What has been done with the World Federation of Science Journalists that was very interesting. At the time I was president of the European Nuclear Education Network, and I was particularly glad about that. These journalists are having, this federation actually, which is a worldwide federation, is having courses for other journalists in order to cover the actions. So the fact that we were able to connect with them and give them an input in order to cover in a decent way, let me say, the stories on nuclear is, in my opinion, something that can be done. Also the MOOCs and the other, let me say, resources that must be spread could give to the general population some better information. There is always some sort of diffidence to be won because people, let's say, do not understand if what you propose is a sort of indoctrination or, let's say, a real scientific truth. Of course, this is one of the ways to be pursued.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
just
you. Yes,
a comment on MOOC. I mean, MOOC are not meant at educating specialists. They are meant at providing basic knowledge for a large number of students, but with very little pedagogical support. So when you want to educate specialists, you need the teachers active in providing this support. So we shouldn't mix educating specialists, for which you need to have the teachers heavily involved, and for which you cannot have many students.
I totally agree. There are different types of
opinions
education.
anyway, yeah? Because there are different opinions because there are the concept of flipped classroom and let's say the instructors and helpers, yes, and so on, which are replacing the classical figure of the teacher. But you are speaking
but
to a university teacher, so I couldn't agree more than with you.
I think we all, or most of us, share the very same opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.